So the reset password is taken care of as well. Let's jump to our automatic login so our user doesn't have to insert the password every time. Let's go to our scene delegate, and here we have some functions written for us by Apple. And the one we are interested in is the first one, which is will connect to session, option, connection, options, etc. So this is the first thing is being called once our application is loaded. You can see some boilerplate comments here what each function does. So after this guard let and then scene equals UI Windows scene, we want to write a function to check for auto login. So if I do a print statement here, and if we let's put some dots next to it. If I run the application, you can see that this things is running the first thing we can see here. Let's go here. You can see auto login prints out. This is a very good place to check if our user has authenticated, and then it takes us to the application instead of showing the login screen. So let's create a function in order to check if the user is authenticated or not. To do that, I'm going to import Firebase Authenticator, because this is the way we check if there is a local user. And at the bottom here, I'm going to put mark, call this auto login, and let's create a function which is going to just call auto login. Okay, it doesn't take or return anything. Here simply we want to check if the user is logged in or not. And in order to keep track of these changes, so we want to be notified every time if the user login state changes, because Firebase has this handy function, Firebase Authenticator, that keeps track of the state of the user. So if he logs in, if he logs out, we will be notified. So we'll say var auth listener. So we are going to listen for all these changes, and this is going to be equals, not equals, it's going to be type of auth state did change handler, and this can be an optional. So we have this thing as a variable, and now we can access that. Say auth listener is equals, and then I'm going to say access authenticator auth.add state did change listener. So we are assigning a state did change listener to the listener we just created, and I'm going to just hit enter on it. We have two variables here, authenticator and a user object. So I'm going to call them as they are, auth and user. And here we want to, whenever the value changes, because if we are logged in, we are going to be logged out. And once we are logged out, we don't want to keep listening for these changes. So I'm going to say auth listener, this authenticator, and we want to remove this the state the change listener, and then we need to provide the name of the listener we want to remove, which is our authentication listener. So once we are notified that we logged out, we don't want to be notified next time our user logs in. So we can say self.auth listener, and we are force unwrapping this. Remember, this is an optional, so it may be a nil. We are force unwrapping it because just on the line above we set the value of it. So first thing, we stop listening for any new changes, and then we are going to check one more thing. Apart from our Firebase authentication that keeps a local user, we also want to make sure that a user object in our user defaults exist as well. So it's like double protection for us. So we say if user is not equals nil, which is the user here. So if a Firebase user is not equals nil, and user defaults dot object for key k current user is not equals to nil, it means now we have our authenticated user and the local user object that we are saving. So if we have these two things, we can go to our application. So we can enter our application. So let me just get rid of these empty lines. So here we are going to create another func. Call this, let's call this private func. Go to app. All right, and if this is the case, because this everything happens on a background thread, we want to get on a main thread because we are going to change the user interface. We are going to go from here to another view, so we better be on a main thread because the UI change is happening. And in order to jump on a main thread, we can use this patch queue, this patch queue dot, again we get a main queue asynchronously, and all the code we write here is going to run on a main thread. So I can say self go to app. So if we have a user and the current user saved on user defaults, please go to the application and go to app function. What we need here, we want to present another view in our view hierarchy, because when our application starts, the login screen is the root view controller. Because if you go to main storyboard here, you can see this is the entry point of our application. This is what this arrow means. Whichever view has this arrow, or if you just click on that, and in our attributes inspector here, you can see is initial view controller ticked. This means that this is the root view controller of our application. So what we need to do is, instead of this, to make another view as a root view controller of our application. And to do that, first thing, we need to have this another view. So currently we have the login or register, which neither of it we want to make a root view controller in case if the user logs in. So let's create another view, which in our case is going to be a tab bar controller. So let's get one from here, tab bar controller, and by default it has a tab bar and two views attached to it. Now I can see our minimap on top gets bigger once we add more things to it. And by selecting our tab bar controller, we will be able to give it a name. So here you can make sure it's selected. It has blue all around it. And then if I go to this class inspector, on top it has the class which we are not going to use, but underneath it has identity and something called storyboard ID. So if we give it a name in our storyboard, then we can use that storyboard ID in order to initialize this view in a code. So let's call this main view. Hit enter. You can also copy this because we are going to use this. And the reason I'm copying it is simple, because if you don't type the name correctly as we have given it, then it's gonna crash our application because it cannot find it. So in our function go to app, we are going to create a view. So say main view is equals UI storyboard. We access our storyboard, then initialize it. Remember, our storyboard has a name, and the name you can actually get it from here. It's called main.storyboard. So the name is main. Bundle, you can put nil because this is in our main bundle. Then we want to instantiate a view controller. So you say dot instantiate view controller with identifier, and our identifier is the key identifier we provided, so it's called main view. I'm copy pasting it. Then we need to say what type of view is this. In our case, it's UI tab bar controller. Okay, so we have initialized this tab bar controller, and what we need to do now is to set this as the root view of our application. If you scroll up, you can see that there is a variable called window, which is UI window. So this is the first window that our application gets open once we are initializing our application. So we can ask this window to set a root view controller to main view, and this will present the root view controller our main view. Now to make the magic happen, we need to call this auto login, and this will be called instead of this printout. So we just say auto login, and let's run our application. You remember last time we ran it, it asked me to log in, just show me the login screen, and now it should take me to an empty white view. You can see this is a tab bar controller because we have item 1 and item 2, which is, if we jump to our main storyboard, you can see this is an item 1 and item 2 here. You can actually drop a label if you want here, just to make sure you are in the right place. I will just put it in the middle if I can find it. And let's run this. So you can see it says label, and the second item has nothing. So we are in our tab bar controller. But if, for example, I go here, delete my application, because currently I have no way to log out my user, in order to test it, I'm going to delete the application. And let's run it again. Now it should show me the login screen. And I can also register if I want to, but let's try to log in. So I say iOS devschool@gmail.com, password, login. You see the login happened. It just says go to app, but remember we didn't write the functionality. Then when our user logs in, we want to go to this tab bar controller we just created. So this we need to write in our next lecture. So once we have this printout, says enter the application, we just write the same function that we have, like go to app, and this will take us to our main application.